Well, he's got a record.
Of the events, except for the singing. That way we'll save our souls. Could get in trouble. Okay. Let's see. You guys got your stuff. You know, we kind of, I don't know where we started the new session. I think it was in December, but it's noted in the information there, so don't get too confused. I didn't have them labeled right. This is session 8. I hope we'll finish probably by session 9, but, you know, who knows? You said you wanted to keep going slow, so we're going slow, and that's positive. You know, the thing is to see and understand what it means in the Greek, and that's the point. So, these are the words that I have, and they're all in a single verse, which is usually what I like to do anyway. So let's look at these words. E-G-G, egg, right? E-G-G-I-C-E-N. It's an E-N sound. This is an E-N. In-Giken. Anyway. Igizio. Ingizio. From ako, to squeeze or throttle. This literally means to make near. Make near. Which is interesting because we have the para, which means near. Make near. But it's a whole verb. It's a whole word on its own. And let's see, to make near, to be near. Any case, look what how they've translated. I don't think there's huge issues with translation, but we'll see this.
Is it meant to be sound aggressive when it says squeeze or throttle?
Yeah, ingizio, you know,
It sounds like you're grabbing him by the shirt and pulling him near.
Yeah, we'll see. You know, that's the thing about, remember, Greek culture isn't like, Greek culture is not like our culture, and it's more like it is an ancient culture, and so they're not as touchy-feely. I mean, here's people running around naked, right, and going to public baths, and they have some pretty interesting festivals. They're not as sexually whatever as we like to think they are, or they're, you know, the baccalaurean kind of stuff, or the bacchanals. Baccalaurean is probably not a good word to put with bacchanals, because that's what you did in college, right? But in any case, they're not quite as bad as we want to make them in our cultural understanding of them. They're pretty upright people until you get to the symposium, and then they think that the extraneous sex and activities they have in the symposium are moral and ethical, which is their culture. That's what all cultures believe. What they do is moral and ethical. They just do. That's what cultures are all about, you know. So until you get a cultural change, right? And notice what happens when you get a cultural change.
Bunch of amoral people step in.
Well, the opposite's true. The cultural change that happened to the Greeks was what? What's the great cultural change that happened to the Greeks?
Christianity.
Yeah, Western civilization occurred, which is Christianity. Christianity is what brought about Western civilization. And so and what happened to the old culture? What happens to the old culture even an amoral culture, when an amoral culture moves in, what happened to the previous culture? Well, what's wrong with it? Why did it change?
The younger people move to the new?
No, it's unethical. It's immoral. I mean, even in our culture, right? For example, the modern pickup culture of the colleges. What was wrong with that Christian repressive culture before that? It was evil. It held women down. It prevented sexual freedom and sexual equality, right? And so now the modern pickup culture of Sex and the City is moral and ethical, right? In the minds of the people, the culture is moral and ethical. That's the problem with cultures. And so the previous culture has to be evil. You always see this. This is the way it works. Okay? So even when you have a culture that is, we would say that the Christian culture, and I can argue quite well and logically, the Christian culture is a very moral and ethical culture. But yet, as new cultures come along, the Gnostic culture, you know, the cultures we see, the pickup culture in the colleges, What happens to Christianity? Oh, it's an evil culture that represses human beings. Represses children, represses women, represses men, prevents you from your sexual freedom and from doing what you want. You know, who cares if we have venereal disease and chlamydia that we can't stop and people can't have babies anymore and the society is going to pot and people die in the streets because they're shooting each other because they're not taught a moral and Christian education. That's okay, right?
We compromise.
Well, they wouldn't say that. See, that's the thing about culture. You always have to think. What's that?
They deny that has anything to do with it.
Of course it does, right? Even though in 1962 we got rid of all anyway. And by the way, they don't teach Greek anymore, so that's okay. Here's our next word, Oh, and I should have continued what the point was. The point is, all right, in the Greek culture, it is an ancient culture, and so the Greek ancient culture was not a touchy-feely culture. So you didn't, when you greeted people, in our culture, when you greet someone, you shake their hand. When you greet someone in a French culture, you kiss their cheeks, if they're even faintly acquainted with you. In many Islamic cultures, you hug people, even when you're not super acquainted with them. That's part of the culture. This culture is not that kind of culture. And so when you find a word that is very, to be near to a person, therefore what happens to your word use? Your word use becomes instead of you using a euphemistic word like in English, right? You know, to us, near means I'm close to you. But what happens if I get, like, within your space, right? If I get into your cultural space, what happens? I'm too near to you. So this word probably means in Greek, the reason it is a Greek word for being near means it's too close, right? These words are beautiful in our culture and our language, because if you start looking for words and how they fit, I bet you'll find, I don't know right off the top of my head which word in English means you're too close.
In your face.
Well, that's a figure of speech. See, a beautiful figure of speech in English, a euphemism, right? But Greek has a word which means, and we'll see, let's see what it means in the context, but literally, in your face, right? You're too close, near, way near. And you see it comes from throttle or squeeze. And remember, thambeo, the word that means, you know, being under pressure, means being in a crowd. Because what's the big deal in a crowd in ancient cultures? Well, there's not many people, right? I mean, I was going to mention it, I think, in the thing. Jerusalem has 20,000 people we know of, except during the festivals. Festivals have 1 million, according to the record we have in the past. 20,000 normally. 20,000 people in a city the size of Jerusalem. That's not a big group. You can't get a crowd together with that. I mean, if you, one of those things they call crowd, those crowd things they call together. Anyway, cultures. Flash mobs. You got a flash mob in Jerusalem, you know, 20,000 people, you might get 2, right? Yeah? Anyway. Paradidomai. Perideos. I tell you, I don't do declensions for you, that's okay. This is paradidomai. Didomai. Didomai means to give. Give. Give near. Give near. So, to yield up. To yield up. This is a word that unfortunately keeps getting translated over and over again to be betray. Betray. But I don't get betray from near give. I can't get betray from near give. The only thing I get from near give, the closest you get is probably to surrender. To yield up is really good, a really good translation in English. But this is a word that the NIV and also almost every other Bible you're going to pick up always translates to betray. And we'll see this in context because it's not exactly well done. This is A-G-O, and this is the declension, M-E-N, but ego, let go of my ego. This means to lead. Lead. Unfortunately, it is also mistranslated to, you notice it says lead away, but bring, to carry, also where we see it, it's going to be to drive or to go, more to go. And you notice it says by implication, but that's not actually what the word says. here is E-G-E-I-R-E, and you've had this one before. This is the declension right here of the verb egerio. Egerio, and the reason it's in here is because egerio ek nekros means rise from the dead, right? Egerio just means to rise up. So we'll see it in the context of to rise up. In any case, we are at 40. And the logos to tell us. What is the logos to tell us? We are currently at, this is where we're standing. You always have to read Greek as a logos to tell us. A logos to tell us, let's see, I think I see some, I don't know, some freshish faces here. Not so fresh. In any case, just as a quick explanation, Greek writing is always a logos to tell us, so it's a logical argument to an unstated conclusion. That's why the telos is put at the top of the arrow. Because it's not like English where we have a stated conclusion. We always have an unstated conclusion. So the logos to telos at this point, does anyone want to venture the guess from last week? What is the specific logos to telos at this very point in Mark? Mark 14, Jesus is in the winepress at the Mount of Olives. They're at the winepress, not Gethsemane, it's not a garden, it is the winepress at the Mount of Olives where they have olives and they press olive. The olive press, sorry, Gethsemane. So Jesus is out commensurating the fact that his disciples might
Fall away.
fall away. And if they fall away, that's it. That's the end of everything. Nothing will get done. So the logos to telos at this moment, in spite of what you have probably heard or talked about or heard in sermons forever and ever in your whole life, Jesus is not worried about dying. He is not worried about death. He is not worried about whatever you think he's worried about. He does not ask God to take the cup from him. He asked God to take the cup from his disciples because the disciples are failing. He told them. Matter of fact, we had whole chapters in Mark where he told the disciples, don't fall asleep. Stay awake. Over and over. And matter of fact, if you go back and look at the parables that we've looked at, half the parables at least are, don't go to sleep. The master's coming back. La, 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 right? So Jesus is really concerned. He's not concerned about death. He already told them, I'm going to die. I'm going to resurrect. The logos to tell us here is about the disciples. And so, in 40, yeah. Somebody had a question?
Worse than that, because they didn't understand the parables when he told them, then he explained them again, over and over, and it's still unaccurate.
Well, you know, this again comes from, and I'm glad we started with a little bit of talking about culture, because this comes back from the Hebrew culture. Because the Hebrew culture, like English, like our culture, English culture and our culture, or Hebrew culture and our culture is extremely euphemistic. Very euphemistic. That's one of the reasons I don't mind teaching Hebrew, but I like Greek. Greek is eminently concrete. When you have a Greek word, it means what it means. It doesn't change and get slippery all the time. In Hebrew, words are slippery. In English, words are really slippery. Have you noticed? Matter of fact, we invented figures of speech. There are lots of kinds of figures of speech in Greek, but not nearly as many as in English. English is full of figures of speech of every kind and duration. But the problem with this, and the reason the disciples had so many problems, is when Jesus said, stay awake, their Hebrew minds said, well, yeah, I mean, that's probably a good answer.
Stay awake.
What does it mean to stay awake? Right? I mean, really, it's almost like the things you hear on the news, you know? So you said that you know, you didn't do this. Well, you know, the person responds, well, what does it mean to do this? What does it really mean now? Right? The answer of a scoundrel. Well, no, it's not. It's the answer of a culture. If you live in a culture that's very euphemistic, you can even ask the question of what does is mean? Which actually we'll discuss maybe today. because is a very important, fundamental part of Greek language. And so is of English, except is means so many more things than is, right? In our language. Because it's an identity verb in our language. But in most foreign languages, it is not an identity verb. You know what the difference is? I think Jan does, but I won't put her on the spot. You see, in English, we say things like, it was a dark and stormy night. But Greek would never say something like that. Because in Greek, you don't identify things directly. For example, the direct application in English is I say, I am. I am Lionel Alford. I am this person or that person. I am a man. I am a woman. In Greek, you would never say that. Because they do not have identity. They don't have identity politics. You can't if you have a non-identity verb in your culture. So in other words, it is considered both immoral and impractical for me to say I am. Why? Why would it be impractical for me to say I am? It's obvious. Exactly. You know, the only person that could really say I am is God. And you notice in Hebrew, the I am identifies Jehovah, God. The I am. Guess what? In Hebrew culture, which is a euphemistic culture, they don't use identity that way. They're like the Greeks. As a matter of fact, most ancient cultures don't use identity. Do you know why? What do you think? Think about this. It goes back to what we talked about way back before, at the beginning of class.
You don't want to associate it with a specific person. You want the concept out there? Or?
Well, yeah. If there's 20,000 people in your city, why don't I need to say I am?
You have 20,000 witnesses.
Well, among 20,000, I'm unique. Among 10 people in a family, I'm unique, right? Among a clan, I'm unique. Among a city of 20,000, I'm pretty unique. I can go down the street and almost know everyone in my city. Literally, right? But when I get 1 million people, or 10 million people, or 20 million people, what happened? I'm just another, you know, no longer are you unique. I'm just like everybody else. I'm special, right? And so therefore, your culture now needs to develop a way of expressing your uniqueness. And therefore, I am. And suddenly you get identity politics, right?
Correct.
I am, you see? So it's very interesting because cultures are like this. And language is like this. So you'll see this more and more. In any case, in 40, did I answer the question at least recently? Or
Yeah.
or you know, I know, see, like I tell you, history isn't a bumper sticker, and neither is language or literature, right? If it were, then guess what? You would be super geniuses. You could read it on the back of cars. See? That's the problem with this history stuff. So, you know, you say, well, you're running down rabbit trails. Well, I'm not running down rabbit trails. History is one huge rabbit trail. And if you look at it the way I look at history, I don't look at history, well, if you've noticed, I don't look at history the way a lot of historians look at history, or at least the way you may have been taught history. The reason is because I'm a dumb engineer and I look at history from, well, this caused this, that caused this, that caused this. Because that's what I see it as, causation. Where many historians look at, oh, this is, and this is. And you notice we've been taught that when we look at the New Testament, well, it's a story.
Soundbite.
It's a soundbite, right? And none of it's a soundbite. Because in Greek, it all has to fit together. So, in any case, we're at 40, and when that is Jesus, came back, he found them sleeping, because their eyes were katabaramai. They were down burdened. Literally, their eyes were heavy. That's why down burdened, I think, is a beautiful word in Greek. They did not know what to say to him. In other words, they had no answer to make. He came back to them the third time. He found them sleeping. Or the second time, they were sleeping before he said, okay, he's told them, in Mark, he's told them for at least 3 chapters. He gave a whole chapter, Mark gave a whole chapter to it, but he told them all over and over again, stay awake, stay awake, stay awake. Here's their opportunity, right? This is like you're going on stage. You've been preparing to go on stage for weeks. I don't know, everybody done a stage play or a musical or anything like that, right? When you're a kid or a school, and you're ready to go, and guess what? You've been preparing, and Jesus said, your producer says, stay awake, stay awake, stay awake, and you get on stage and you freeze while you fall asleep. I mean, this is what's happened. So, they didn't know what to say to him. I mean, you'd be the same way. This just cracks me up. They didn't really get it. Returning the 3rd time, he said to them, this is 41, are you still sleeping and resting? And then he says, and you can see Jesus. You know, like I said, we like to picture Jesus as this big, dumb guy with, you know, big eyes and he's a hugger, right? Look, if you even go by half the picture, he's a carpenter. Well, he actually isn't a carpenter. That's not what Mark says. That's not what the Bible says. He is a worker with his hands. He's a whatever. It's the word we get technician from, but basically he works with his hands to build things, right? And it doesn't specify what he builds. It is we haven't looked at all of them, but I'm not sure if it specifies what exactly he or Joseph worked with. But in any case, here's a guy who came out of the middle class at least, probably middle class. His mother was probably wealthy according to what we saw before in Matthew. His father was probably rather wealthy because of what we saw in Matthew, probably because they were technicians working with their hands, or he was. She was probably in Gynoseum, which means they're at least middle class or upper middle class. But here's a guy, if you work with your hands, what do your hands look like? Rough. He's probably not like a farmer. You know, a farmer has hands lit. Remember, I told you this before. In the past, you know, you may remember it if your parents were farmers or your grandparents were farmers. Their hands were such that your father, your grandfather may have never been able to thread a needle because he couldn't hold it, right? His hands were so callous and so rough. I expect Jesus wasn't at that stage. He was probably middle class, and so he was probably like your mothers were, who had really rough, calloused hands, but yet they were still nimble enough to handle that. But still, here's a guy who works with stuff. He's probably pretty big, pretty strong, you know, and I doubt very seriously he is like the doe-eyed idiot that is pictured in all the pictures. He's a guy of immense strength and at least charisma, right? Because how many disciples are with him? We don't know. It says multitude.
Yeah.
Lots of people. Who knows, right? They're enough that they're covering a relatively large area. It's not just 12. He may have lost a few, but you know, somebody found a place in the inn in Jerusalem and had some bucks on him. But otherwise, he's got his guys here, and they're probably a pretty large amount. But he is a charismatic kind of guy. So when he stands up, you know, and he said, well, you know, I would have been afraid, I think, I bet he was kicking him. Remember Peter? I said, he's probably kicking Peter. Are you awake? Are you awake? Right? Isn't that how you do when you're on well, guys do. Women probably are much nicer. But guys, when you go on a camp, right? And you're on a camp trip with other guys or with, like, the Boy Scouts, and you're like, get up! Get up! Come on, dude! Get out of your sleeping bag. No, it's too cold. In any case, return the 3rd time. Are you sleeping and resting? And he goes, enough. The hour has come. The hours. Now this is very interesting because remember, if you look back, and I'm not going to do it, but you look back into Mark and see how many times Jesus talks about the hour or the day or the time, right? Remember, all the parables about the coming, all the parables about the time has come, the time will come, the hour will come, and remember the end of 13, the destruction of the temple. Stay awake because the time is near, the hour is near, the era is near. And now what does he say?
This is go time.
The time has come. It's go time. This is go time, guys. This is it. Let's roll, right? I'm surprised we missed this. You know, this gets kind of, in almost every every time it's read in the church, I've ever seen it, it's just gets rolled over, right? It's like, here the commander just stood up, and remember I told you Mark has a lot of command Greek words that are command words or military type words in it. And look what he says. Enough! The hour has come. And look what he says. Look, the Son of Man is perdidomai, is to be yielded up. Literally not betrayed, to be yielded up, to be surrendered into the hands of hamatolos, those who missed the mark. Hamatolos, those who missed the mark. Now the problem with this is, we like to say, okay, into the hands of sinners. The problem is that what did Jesus call them and call everybody and call all the parables? Who was everybody, pretty much? Well, it's nice to say sinners. They are hamatolos. 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 You can see the magic word in this one, right?
Hamartia.
Huh?
Hamartia, sinner.
Well,
Oh, tolos. Oh.
telos. It's telos. Missing the mark. Missing the point. Exactly. Oh, yes. If everything is a logos to telos, the people who are harmatolos are those who don't get the point. And guess what? Throughout Mark, who didn't get the point?
Everybody.
And
Most everybody.
well, yeah, most everybody. And guess what's happening right now? Who's missing the point? Look, they're still on the ground. Does it say anywhere they stood up? No. They're still missing the point, right? That's why I like this. Actually, I like better than missing the mark. You hear it all the time. I've heard it, evangelical speakers and other speakers, and they talk about, okay, the word hamatolos means miss the mark. It applies to shooting arrows. Well, yeah, it does, but remember, in the Greek, everything the Greeks think about is about the logos to telos. So when I say hamatolos, you miss the point. So a sinner is somebody who missed the point, which goes back to our cultural thing, right? Who's missing the point? See? That's probably, that's probably a beautiful theological concept for another class and another day. But think about it. How would you change a culture? Every culture thinks they're the right culture, and every culture thinks they're doing the right thing. But if you can show the culture that they're not getting the point of life, living the pursuit of happiness, what they're doing, you're there. See? In any case. Return the third time, he says this, we missed this too, I love it. He says, look, the Son of Man is paradidomai. And actually it's not is. That's an identity verb that, by the way, is thrown in there in the English because we need it. It becomes a helper verb with betrayed. However, he is yielded, and not is. He yielded. In any case. No is. In the Greek. Who's the Son of Man?
Son of David.
It's whoever is going to be betrayed or whatever.
Exactly. Jesus has not told. Look, in Jesus has never from his lips said, I'm the Son of Man. I'm Elvis, right? The whole time he's never said anything like that. It's always been talked around. It's always been euphemistically, talked about. Jesus has never said, I'm the Son of Man. I'm the Son of David. I'm this, I'm that, the other thing. Because what is that? What is that conclusion? It's a Greek telos, right? However, Jesus just said, look, the Son of Man is going to be yielded up. So what does that mean?
Whoever's yielded up is the Son of Man.
Somebody there is the Son of Man, and somebody there is going to be yielded up. And if he's yielded up, he's probably the Son of Man. Okay, this is beautiful Greek. This is beautiful Greek logos to telos. Okay, this is the setup of, all right, remember in your logic, the first thing you probably learned is if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C.
B.
Ha! Did I do it right? Yeah, I did it right. A equals C.
Nice try.
And we put a therefore, right? Because this is the logos. And the Greeks, because of the way their culture is, would have left this part off, because what would they have said?
It's obvious.
It's obvious.
It's obvious. You can figure this out yourself. This is a beautiful logos to telos in a single set of sentences. It's a logical argument. So, look, the Son of Man is betrayed. Bong! Everybody there, well, all the readers, all the Greek readers, can you see how excited they are now? Because this means that guess what they're going to hear? Or guess what's going to happen?
Finally get the telos.
They're going to get the telos, exactly. But the telos will not be stated. So let's see what happens.
When Jesus told them numerous times that the Son of Man was to be killed and third day, did he use the same wording as surrendered? The
Yes,
Son of Man will be surrendered.
he did. Remember, that's why perididomai is a word that I've had over and over and over again. Sorry, I keep repeating the words, not because you're dumb, it's because I want to reinforce them. So I reuse them exactly because of that. And because Mark, every one of the Gospels uses a little different Greek verbiage for the same things. Well, actually, we translate them the same, but they are not the same. See, we translate everything the same, and then we say Matthew, Mark, and Luke are synoptic. They are not synoptic. They're Greek logos to telos, and they're all separate documents that are different logos to telos. See? But yes, exactly. When Jesus keeps talking about the Son of Man, and that's why this is, irony is not the right word, but this is why this is a beautiful logos to telos in this style. Because every time Jesus says, the Son of Man will be this, the Son of Man will be this, then when it happens, he makes a statement like this: the Son of Man will be perididomai. Well, he said all over and over again, every time he said it, the Son of Man must be perididomai. And then what happens, right? Remember, I should probably have quoted that. His quote was, the Son of Man must be perididomai, must be yielded up to the chief priests and the elders and the leaders, and then he will be killed. Then he will be killed, I think, basically destroyed. Agatheo, something like that. And then he will be Nekros. He'll be raised from the dead. Every time he told them, he used those same words. So, since this is what he said.
That was the third person, now it becomes first person.
He said, look, the hour has come. Right now. We're rolling. I like that. We're rolling. Look, the Son of Man is perididomai, which means next what must happen? He must be given to the high priest, right? And then he must be killed, and then he must rise again. So this is a setup. Mark, I know we miss it. We miss it because we see little stories about Jesus and the disciples and all these sweet little things. This isn't what's happening. Mark is giving us a beautiful logos to telos. The whole logos to telos has been driving from the very beginning. He proved he was God. He is now proving that he is the Son of Man, the Christus, the Son of David. So each of those things have rolled off. And remember, he was anointed by the woman. That's such a beautiful scene. We miss these. This is probably the most important thing that is coming out of the gospel, is this specific verse right here. Because in this verse, Jesus basically declared what?
Son of Man.
He's declaring at this point. Look what he says. Enough. This is the hour. He just says, he is declaring he's the Son of Man. This is enormously important. Because in the Greek worldview, the Greeks want to know, who is this guy? Right? That's what Mark is trying to tell them. Of course, we want to know, and the Hebrews at the point, well, the disciples want to know, right? They're sleeping. They're laying there. They're probably still snoozing. And this moment is passing them by. This is why Mark is recording it for us. Because probably they wouldn't have, right? We wouldn't have got it from the 12 disciples, but we at least got it from Mark. We'll see maybe Mark at the end here. In 42, and this is one that I give you almost every quote. Rise, Egerio, rise, Egerio. Let us ago. Let us ago. Egizio. Here comes, literally comes near my yielding. It doesn't say betrayer, okay, in the Greek. It says my yielding. We put in betrayer because we want there to be a bad guy. Who's the bad guys here?
Oh, the sinners.
Huh?
The sinners, the people that don't get it. This is
You got it, dude. The people the people who don't get it are those who don't get it. Hamatelos. And who are hamatelos right now?
Everyone.
Every one of them, yeah. The disciples are sleeping. Jesus is having his peak moment. Luckily, Mark was there, and we see old Mark, but Mark is there seeing all this, right? Or maybe he got it from somebody else who happened to be more awake. I'm just saying, nobody is getting this, and this is the moment. Egerio. Not just get up, Egerio. Not rise from the dead, but Egerio. This is Egerio eknekros. This means rise from the dead. Let ago, not let us go, ago. What does he want them to do? Lead. The whole of everything from 8 on is about basically being leaders. Remember? The optio, he uses this term when he calls Peter. He says, Peter, here's the legion. And here's the signum. And here's the optio. The optio sits here, and here's the commander. Here's the legion, the head legion dude, right? The centurion. Centurion's here. The optio goes anywhere he wants, basically making sure that the legion, the century, is marching correctly. When the leader must go, who takes the lead position? The optio. And when Jesus called Peter and the disciples, especially Peter, I think Peter and Andrew, the two first dudes, he said, optio, get behind me. In Greek, optio, that's the name in the Latin that's used for the optio. He uses the verb, okay, in Greek. Even though it's a Latin word, it's a borrowed word in the Latin. So when Jesus says this, he says, lead. Lead. My yielding is coming now. He wants them to get up and get in front and do something, right? Now, we know the end of the story, unfortunately, as Paul Harvey said, so we know that they did what?
Pull out the sword and sliced off in here.
Well, actually, we're going to see about that, but anyway, are they going to lead? It's astounding. It's astounding how we mistranslate. Literally, I got a literal translation. This means rise up and lead, for my surrender comes near. That's literally what this should be translated as from the Greek, and not rise, let us go, here comes my betrayer. Literally, rise up and lead, for my surrender comes near. 43. Just as he was Lelo speaking to them. He wasn't Legos. He was speaking to them. Judas, one of the 12, parageomai. He came near. Now here's, near, parageomai means to near come. Now here's why use Egerio, or why not use Egiz, the sound, okay, I'm not a Greek pronunciation expert, okay? E-N-G is the pronunciation. In Geking? Anyway, this word, the difference between this word and parageomai, okay? In the one, Jesus is using command language. In English, what do we call it, Jan, where you make an expression in English where it's a command? I think we just call it command, but there's a way of saying a verbal, when I say come, right, in English, it's imperative, yes, an imperative case. So he's using the imperative case, and when you write the imperative case, you usually use short, verbs, etc., etc. So in this case, he's demanding or ordering them, right? Okay? They're coming near. It's an expository type statement. In this case, he says, as he was Lelo, Judas one of the 12, Parageomai, came near. With him was a polis, a large thong, ocholos, they are not armed with swords. Okay, I'm sorry to break it to you. The word is macharia, which means knives. It says knives and zulon. Knives and, it's really not clubs. Zulon, anybody know what a zulon is?
Probably a stick.
Yes, it's timber. It means a stick. They got knives and sticks. All right. Tell me why they have knives and sticks.
They weren't soldiers, they were just people of the church.
They're not allowed to.
Because the Romans don't allow them to have weapons.
Because the Romans do not allow them to have weapons. What's the first thing you do when you conquer a people ever?
Disarm, take away their
You
weapons.
disarm them, okay? In the history of the world, go back and look at the Old Testament, go back and look at the New Testament, go back and look at the Apocrypha, look back at all of history. The first thing you do when you conquer people is you disarm them. Because if you disarm them, they can't fight and revolt. That's why Samson took the jawbone of an ass. Because there was nothing else. Remember the guys who went to get him? The people that went out to get him were the soldiers of Jerusalem. Guess who were their rulers? The Phoenicians, right? Remember that? The Phoenicians kept the weapons. What did they give to the children of Israel's soldiers? Nothing.
Something to eat.
Knives and timber. And so old Samson grabs the jawbone of an ass because that's all there is. And yet he killed a whole bunch of them, right? Remember this, the first thing that you do when you conquer a people is you disarm them. And I don't get why, I don't know.
The founding fathers knew their history very well.
The founding fathers knew Greek and they knew Latin. And if you know any Latin and Greek, Mike, this is probably the thing. This is probably how we pervert education to the greatest degree, is if you read any Latin or any Greek, guess what every advice column in the Latin and Greek tells you to do the first time you conquer anybody? Take away their weapons, right? Just saying. So they don't want the kids to read the Latin and Greek because they might figure it out when they're being, had, right? So in any case, yeah, the founding fathers did know Latin and Greek very well. In fact, they based our Constitution on the failed constitutions of the Athenian democracy, the Ecclesia, and the Roman Republic.
Lionel, a lot of people say, well, there are Romans in this group, and so that's why there were swords.
But the word is not swords, so it can't be swords. The word that is used is not the word for sword. The word, if they would have used the word sword, it would have been a gladius. The word gladius is a Latin word because who didn't use swords? What did the Greeks use? They used spears mainly, and basically long spears. They were, what do they call those kind of long spears? Pikes. Yeah, they used pikes, and they did have they had really short kind of swords, but that was late. The problem with it is, well, this is all historical, guys. This is stuff that they, when they teach you about the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, except they didn't, did they? They left out all those really important points, like, for example, why did you have spears? Because spears are easy to make and don't take a lot of metal. Why didn't you have swords? Because swords take a lot of metal. And they're very heavy. Well, generally heavy, yes.
Why would we think there would be any Roman soldiers there? This isn't a Roman thing. They didn't have any problem with Jesus. This is strictly the Jewish church, or the Jewish leadership.
Well, I was bad. When I wrote Centurion, I intentionally wanted to put the Centurion with a small group. in that mix. And so if you read my book, you'll see that I think that there is latitude, not in Mark. Mark does not give us any impression that there were any, they don't talk about the composition of that group. Matthew and Luke and John do talk about the composition of the group. And we know from, I believe, Matthew, that they were the temple soldiers. So if you read my book, Centurion, I took them all together and kind of, to Mark it wasn't important who was in that group, per se, right? But to the others it was more important. And what I did is I said, okay, if Pilate had allowed the temple guards to leave their stations and go up with whatever they had to take Jesus,
He's taking sides.
then he would also send his centurion with some legionnaires to keep an eye on. And so that's, in my book, that's why the centurion is there but hands off, right? His job is to make sure they don't harm the prisoner. Because remember, they're under what law? They're under Roman law. They're not under Jewish law. And so it makes a lot of sense if Pilate knew what was going on, he would, okay, picture this. If you read my book, you'll know exactly the politics going on in this whole era. But picture this. I have a large group of people. Now, this is a Passover, so there's lots of people around, right? But I have a multitude on the Mount of Olives who might not normally be at the Mount of Olives. They'd be normally in the city, right? Because they'd have protection in the city from lots of things. So they normally would be on the city. So Pilate is in his palace, or in his quarters, right, near the Anatolian area, the Anatolian castle, it's not castle, Anatolian fortress. The Anatolian fortress, here's the temple. We believe the Anatolian fortress was there, and Pilate's court was here, and Pilate may have had he was in this area. We don't know where exactly. But to get to the Mount of Olives, you have to go through the fish gate, which is here, right? There's also another gate here, which you probably wouldn't go out because that's where all the Romans were hanging. So when you went through the gate, okay, so I got a bunch of rabble that are on the Mount of Olives. And now I send a whole bunch more rabble, because it says a large throng, right? Now, what do you think Pilate's thinking?
What's going on?
Organizing.
Civil insurgency or something.
So unless he knew about it, that's why in my book, obviously Pilate knew of what was going on, and he allowed it to occur. Because can you imagine a large throng sneaking through the streets of Jerusalem with sticks and knives? Now, first of all, what do you think the legionnaires are doing?
Sharpening their knife.
They're gladius. They have swords, okay? They carry two swords. They carry one sword, a gladius, which is a really effective weapon for killing people.
Fits well on the end of a stick.
Used mostly, well, they don't put on a stick because they always carry two javelins. They would carry two javelins. One of them was a heavy javelin, one was a short javelin. The short javelin, the light javelin was used for throwing. The heavy javelin was used to stop charges. One of them had the light javelin had the head would disconnect once it was in your body. So it was hard to get out. So, do you really want to face a Roman legion, or even how about a century? How about 80 of these guys? Fully trained, ready to go, carrying their armor. They had armor, and they also had little shields, which were very effective. And they were trained. If you remember Centurion, you know these guys were trained to the peak of efficiency. They were like our special ops guys nowadays, man. They were bursting, ready to go. So you got a mob sneaking through the streets. Yeah, sure, that's going to happen. Pilate knew all about what was going on, so I think Pilate was hanging around there. But it says the throng armed with Macarena with knives and
Table knives?
Zulong, yeah, it could have been table knives. Basically, they were.
Fishing knives.
Work knives.
Table knives, work knives.
Work for everything.
All right. The cultural lesson. What did they eat with in these days?
Fingers.
Fingers and
Fingers. Toes.
knives. Fingers and toes. Fingers and knives. They had knives.
Not everybody could afford a knife.
Not everybody can afford a knife. But what then did you do to make your knife? What was the purpose of a knife? It wasn't for stabbing. For cutting your food. Yeah, because, okay, unlike today, okay, they didn't cut it in bite-sized pieces like they did in Japan. All right. Why do you cut food in bite-sized pieces anyway? What's the point of doing that?
Sticking with your fork.
Easier to chew?
You don't stuff your mouth or...
No. In survival cultures, why do you eat meatloaf? Don't tell me it's because you like it. I mean, meatloaf is good, but why would you have, okay, if you had a choice between a steak and meatloaf.
Meatloaf goes stretches.
Meatloaf goes further because in a survival culture, you want the meat to go as far as possible. So, you know, the point of it is when you finally got meat,
Grab it and run.
you grab it, well, you got to have a way to get it. And so the meat came in hunks, right? Because remember, where did all the meat come from? Huh?
The temple.
The temples, yeah. The meat came from the temples. And it was the festivals. It was the, it was the sacrifice. So the meat came in the sacrifice. You sacrifice the animal. The Greeks roasted their meat. What did the Hebrews do? They boiled it. Ooh, yuck. Oh, but they boiled it. So when they took that carcass of boiled meat out of the cauldron, or they took that roast, or the roast was still on the spit, what did you do to get it?
Carve off a piece.
Yeah, sliced off a hunk, or you hope you had a friend that had something sharp, or you tried with your teeth until somebody slapped you, right? You were ready to eat that stuff. So almost everybody in the culture would have a knife. Knives were ubiquitous, not for survival, not for killing people, not for fighting, although they probably used them that way too, that's okay, but for eating. Because you didn't have anything else. There's no forks, no spoons, only a knife, okay, canifus. And they had sticks, because they get sticks, you pick a stick up off the ground. So they had the sticks, they had some knives, and you can see the knives they had, right? I mean, they had laws like we have too. Yeah, you can't have a knife that's more than 6 inches long because you might hurt somebody, right? I mean, we have laws. Remember Crocodile Dundee? You call that a knife? That's a knife. Look. Don't you wish you did if you if you're fighting the bad guys and the bad guys happen to be the ones that took over your nation?
You don't take a knife to a gunfight.
I have a knife, it's about this high, right? They're smart. They know how to protect themselves. They had sticks. They had sticks with a thong, and it says in 43, sent from the high priest. The high priest. Now, this is something we need to talk about. The Grammateus and the Presbyteros, the elders. How could there be more than one high priest?
Romans were greedy for money.
That is probably a great answer, but how can we have high priests?
The different groups, the Sagittarians and the different factions within.
Well, I like the Sagittarius. Yeah.
Am I close?
No, I think it's funny.
Excuse me.
I should add that in because I like that.
I'm just trying to dig back a little bit, but the different factions within.
Yeah. You're right on. I'm not making fun of you. Sorry. You had the Sadducees, Pharisees, Essenes, and Zealots, but the priests only came out of the Sadducees. So you're right on thinking that way. The thing is that there were high priests because what happened is the Romans were greedy for money, but they're also very smart. So the Romans, one of the first things you do, okay, remember George Orwell? What do you do in George Orwell's world to keep the people stupid in the world going for the government?
Change the meaning of words.
Well, you change the meaning of the words, but you change the names of the group of the organizations. You go from the Department of War to the Department of Peace. You go from the Department of Justice to the Department of, goodness and niceness, right? The Ministry of Truth, exactly. What you do is you change the names to protect the not so innocent. So in this case, what we got is, what you really want to do is you'd like to change the leadership.
Spread it out.
So, well, not so much spread it out,
Put your guy in there.
but you put your guy in there. So that's what the Romans did. Matter of fact, remember, the Essenes believed that the high priest, well, I go into this ancient history, but it's really important ancient history. The reason the Essenes, the Zealots, the Essenes, well, specifically the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes, the reason they split was because the high priest had been named from the Maccabees. The Maccabees means hanger. And so the Maccabees, the father Maccabees, there were 7 sons, And the last two, Simon and John, I believe are their names. Simon and John were declared to be the high priest and the king. Unfortunately, Maccabees was probably not in the tribe of Levi, but he was definitely not in the tribe of Aaron. So therefore, his sons could not be
Priest.
high priests or priests at all. You have to be from Aaron to be the priest. To be the high priest, you have to be the direct lineage of Aaron. So from the time of the Maccabees, the high priests were in question. When this happened, the Essenes took their ball and went home. They said, we're not playing anymore. And we believe the first Essene leader was the original high priest. And he took them with them. As a matter of fact, we believe that because the Essenes continued to sacrifice. There's also some evidence that either a high priest or the Essenes or some group of them started the temple in Alexandria in the Alexandrian school. Do you know why? Alexandria had a temple to Jehovah where they sacrificed animals.
And I mean, a high priest do a proper sacrifice.
Well, you're supposed to have the temple in Jerusalem, but since the time of Joab and Josephus and those dudes back when they split the kingdoms, right, they still did sacrifices to Jehovah in the high country at, what's the famous place? Gideon?
Bethel.
What's that? Bethel and, there's another one. Bethel and, it's on the top of the mountain, whatever, the mountain. Remember, there's a mountain that was, the woman at, what was that? There was a mountain, the mountain of whatever, and there were two places. Bethel was one of them. But anyway, they sacrificed to that, and the Essenes basically took the sacrificial because they had the high priest, and so we know they were sacrificing. We also know the temple in Alexandria was sacrificing, so they may have had a high priest. However, the temple in Jerusalem, the high priest came from the Maccabees, so therefore he wasn't really the high priest. And so what the Romans did is every year they would put a new high priest in place every year. And that way, guess who controlled the temple and its funds and all the stuff going on? The Romans. The Romans are pretty smart that way. This is what you do. When you take over a culture, you take away all their weapons. You want to disarm them. And then the next thing you want to do is take over the infrastructure. So you rename all their agencies and you basically put your people in charge. I mean, it's a really cool way of doing business. Anyway, we'll continue with this. There's all kinds of neat stuff in here. Our Father, we thank you so much for this day, and we thank you for this week. We pray you look after us and bring us back safe. In your name we pray, amen.